The kiss lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted because that's what you do when you're already suspicious. You measure everything, catalog every detail, file it away for later examination. Tessa's lips tasted like mint gum and lies. "I'll miss you," she whispered against my ear, her breath warm on my neck. The words felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror that morning while I pretended to sleep. "Have fun in Napa," I said, watching her wheel her oversized suitcase toward the terminal entrance. She'd packed enough for 2 weeks, not 4 days. The bag was heavier than usual, too. I'd noticed when I loaded it into the car. Tessa always traveled light for girls' trips. This time felt different. My name is Wes Farrow, and I've been married to Tessa Farrow for 8 years. I run a small IT consulting firm from our home office in Brookline, Massachusetts. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me flexibility. Tessa works pharmaceutical sales for Meridian Corp., traveling twice a month to conferences and client meetings. At least, that's what I thought until 6 weeks ago. The doubt started with small things. A new perfume I didn't recognize. Late-night phone calls she took in the garage. Credit card charges from restaurants I'd never heard of. When you spend your days debugging code and tracking down system vulnerabilities, you develop a certain paranoia about inconsistencies. My wife had become a walking logic error. I watched through the terminal windows as she approached security. She moved with purpose, checking her phone every few steps. At the TSA checkpoint, she turned back and waved. I waved back, playing the part of the loving husband seeing his wife off on another girl's weekend. The AirTag I'd sewn into the lining of her toiletry bag 6 weeks earlier would tell me the real story. I drove home in silence, my phone propped on the dashboard displaying the Find My app. Tessa's location showed her moving through Logan Airport as expected. Her flight to San Francisco was scheduled to depart at 2:15 p.m. The girls, Ava, Rhea, and Meredith, had been planning this Napa Valley wine tour for months. At least, that's what Tessa told me. Back at the house, I poured myself a scotch and settled into my office chair. The tracking app refreshed every few minutes. At 2:30 p.m., the dot representing my wife began moving west. But something felt wrong. The trajectory looked off. I opened FlightAware and pulled up the departure information. United 447 to San Francisco had departed on time, but when I cross-referenced the flight path with Tessa's location data, they didn't match. Her signal was heading southeast, not west. My stomach dropped as the realization hit me. I grabbed my laptop and started typing frantically, pulling up flight schedules and cross-referencing departure times. There it was. American 12:03 to Miami, departed at 2:25 p.m. Tessa wasn't going to Napa Valley. She was heading to Florida. I called Derek, my younger brother, and the only person I trusted completely. He answered on the second ring. "What's up, Wes? Shouldn't you be enjoying your bachelor weekend?" "I need you to come over," I said, "and bring your laptop. We've got work to do." Derek had been a Boston PD detective for 12 years before a knee injury forced him into early retirement. Now he worked private security, but he'd kept all his investigative instincts. If anyone could help me figure out what Tessa was really up to, it was him. He arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing his trademark Red Sox cap. Derek looked like a younger version of our father, stocky build, graying hair, and eyes that missed nothing. "All right, what's the crisis?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I showed him the tracking data and explained about the flight discrepancy. Derek studied the information with the same intensity he'd once applied to case files. "So she lied about where she's going," he said finally. "Could be innocent. Maybe they changed their plans." "That's what I thought too." I pulled up Instagram on my phone. But look at this. Ava had posted a selfie from the San Francisco airport 30 minutes earlier. She was with Meredith, both grinning and holding champagne glasses. The caption read, "Napa, here we come. Girls' weekend officially started." Derek frowned. "Where's Tessa in this picture?" "Exactly." I scrolled through more posts. Ria had shared a story from the airport lounge, showing the same group minus my wife. They're all there. She's not. Ria's the pharmaceutical sales rep too, right? Yeah, they work for the same company, started around the same time. Derek leaned back in his chair, processing the information. You said you've been suspicious for a while. What else have you noticed? I told him about the late-night calls, the new clothes, the way she'd become protective of her phone, the expensive dinners charged to our credit card that she claimed were client meetings, the fact that she'd started working out again and buying lingerie I never saw her wear. Classic signs, Derek said grimly. The question is whether she's just having an affair or if there's something bigger going on. The tracking app chimed with an update. Tessa's location had stopped moving. I clicked on the coordinates and watched as Google Maps loaded a street view of Coral Gables, Florida. The pin dropped on an expensive-looking house with palm trees and a circular driveway. Well, I said, taking a long pull from my beer, I guess we're about to find out. Derek was already opening his laptop. Let me run the address through the property database. If she's staying somewhere that fancy, I want to know who owns it. While he worked, I stared at the tracking dot on my phone. My wife was 200 miles away, lying about her location, staying at a house I'd never heard of. The rational part of my brain tried to construct innocent explanations, but my gut knew better. Tessa had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The careful preparation, the elaborate cover story, the coordination with her friends to provide alibis. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was calculated deception. Got it, Derek said, looking up from his screen. The property is owned by Sunset Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware 6 months ago. Shell company, but I can dig deeper if you want. Do it. I finished my beer and opened another. I want to know everything about that house and whoever owns it. As Derek worked his magic with public records and corporate databases, I found myself thinking about the last 8 years of my marriage. When had things started to change? When had Tessa stopped being the woman I fell in love with and become someone I barely recognized? The answer came to me gradually, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. It had started about 2 years ago when she got promoted to senior sales rep. Longer hours, more travel, bigger commission checks. She'd become more confident, more demanding, more entitled. Wes, you need to see this, Derek said, his voice tight with concern. I looked at his screen. He'd pulled up the property records for the Coral Gables house. Purchase price, $2.3 million, date of sale, 3 months ago. But it was the financing details that made my chest tighten. The down payment had come from the sale of another property, our vacation cabin in New Hampshire. That's impossible, I said. We still own the cabin. I was just there last month. Derek clicked through more documents. According to this, it sold 3 months ago for $450,000. Seller signatures from both you and Tessa. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My signature looked perfect, but I'd never signed those papers. I'd never even seen them. She forged my signature, I whispered. Looks that way. And there's more. Derek pulled up another window. The LLC that bought the Miami house has been involved in some interesting transactions. Cryptocurrency purchases, offshore transfers, the kind of stuff that attracts federal attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. Made it safely. Wine tasting starts tomorrow. Love you. I showed the message to Derek. He shook his head. She's good, he admitted. Maintaining the cover story even when she thinks you're buying it. What do I do now? I asked. Derek closed his laptop and looked at me seriously. First, we document everything. Every lie, every forged signature, every suspicious transaction. Then we figure out exactly what she's involved in and how deep it goes. And after that? My brother smiled grimly. After that, we make sure she gets exactly what she deserves. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. the next morning, sent from a Proton Mail account I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "About our wives." I was already awake, nursing my second cup of coffee and staring at the tracking app on my phone. Tessa's location hadn't moved from the Coral Gables house. According to her Instagram story, she was supposed to be having breakfast at a vineyard in Sonoma County. The disconnect was maddening. The email was short and to the point. "Mr. Farrow, my name is Jace Arnell. I believe our wives work together at Meridian Corp. I have reason to think they're both at the same location in Florida right now, and neither of them is where they claim to be. If you're interested in comparing notes, reply to this email. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a full minute, my mind racing. Someone else was tracking his wife. Someone else had discovered the same pattern of lies and deception I'd been uncovering. I forwarded the email to Derek, then typed a careful response. "Mr. Arnell, I'm very interested in what you have to say. Can we arrange a phone call this morning?" The reply came back within minutes, containing a phone number and a suggestion to use Signal for encrypted communication. This guy was serious about operational security. Derek arrived at my house 30 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "I ran background checks on Jace Arnell last night," he said without preamble. 42 years old, works as a financial analyst for a hedge fund in Boston, married to Rhea Morick for 6 years. Clean record, no red flags. "Rhea Morick," I repeated. "That's one of Tessa's co-workers. They travel together sometimes." "According to her LinkedIn, she's a senior pharmaceutical sales rep, same as your wife. Started at Meridian around the same time, too." I opened Signal and dialed Jace's number. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Farrow?" His voice was controlled but tense. "Thank you for calling back. Call me Wes, and I think we have a lot to discuss." "Indeed we do." I heard the sound of a door closing in the background. "I've been tracking my wife's movements for the past month. She told me she was going to a pharmaceutical conference in Denver this week. Instead, she's at a house in Coral Gables, Florida." "Same address as my wife," I confirmed. "What made you start tracking her?" Jace's laugh was bitter. The usual signs. New clothes, secretive phone calls, unexplained absences. But the thing that really got my attention was the money. "What kind of money?" "Large cash deposits in an account I didn't know she had. Cryptocurrency purchases, wire transfers to offshore accounts. My wife has been moving serious money and I want to know where it's coming from." Derek leaned closer to the phone, and I put the call on speaker. "This is my brother Derek. He's helping me investigate. What kind of amounts are we talking about?" "Over the past 6 months? Close to $2 million. Derek and I exchanged glances. That was far more than any pharmaceutical sales rep should have access to, no matter how successful. "Jace, have you heard of Sunset Holdings LLC?" I asked. "The company that owns the Coral Gables house?" "Yes, I've been researching them. Delaware Corporation, minimal public information, but they've been very active in cryptocurrency markets." "Any idea who's behind it?" "I have suspicions, but nothing concrete yet. What I can tell you is that both our wives have been making regular trips to Florida over the past year, always with cover stories about conferences or client meetings." Derek grabbed a notepad and started scribbling questions. "Ask him about Meridian Corp," he whispered. "Jace, what do you know about your wife's employer? Anything unusual about the company?" There was a pause. "That's actually why I reached out to you. I think Meridian Corp is involved in whatever our wives are doing. The company has some interesting connections to pharmaceutical distribution networks in South America and Eastern Europe." "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning they have access to controlled substances and the infrastructure to move them internationally. If someone wanted to set up a side business in pharmaceutical trafficking, Meridian would be an ideal cover." My stomach dropped. Drug trafficking. That would explain the money, the secrecy, the elaborate cover stories. It would also explain why Tessa had been so careful about operational security. "We need to meet in person," I said. "There's too much to discuss over the phone." "Agreed, but not at either of our homes. Too risky if they have surveillance capabilities. Derek suggested a coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral territory where we could talk privately. We arranged to meet at 2 p.m., giving us both time to gather more information. After the call ended, Derek and I spent the morning diving deeper into the financial records. Using Tessa's login credentials, which I'd memorized months earlier, we accessed her banking information and credit card statements. The pattern was clear once we knew what to look for. Every time Tessa traveled for work, there were corresponding cash deposits in her secret account. The amounts varied, but they were always substantial. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, occasionally as much as 25,000 for longer trips. "She's been doing this for over a year," Derek said, highlighting transactions on a spreadsheet. "Look at the timing. Every deposit comes 2 to 3 days after she returns from a business trip." "Payment for services rendered," I muttered. "The question is what kind of services, and who's paying her?" I pulled up Tessa's work calendar, which she'd shared with me years earlier for scheduling purposes. Cross-referencing her travel dates with the financial activity painted a disturbing picture. Every conference in Miami, every client meeting in Orlando, every training seminar in Tampa had resulted in substantial cash payments. "She's not just trafficking," I realized. "She's running a distribution network." Derek nodded grimly. "Which means she's not just cheating on you. She's committing federal felonies." At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into Cafe Luna in Cambridge. Jace Arnell was easy to spot. He looked as tired and angry as I felt. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of controlled tension that comes from discovering your entire life has been built on lies. We shook hands and found a corner table away from other customers. Derek had stayed home to continue his research, but we'd agreed he'd join us if the conversation proved productive. "I've been married to Rhea for 6 years, Jace began without preamble. "I thought I knew her. Turns out I didn't know her at all." "How long have you suspected?" "About 2 months. She started getting sloppy with her cover stories, claimed to be at a conference in Chicago, but her credit card showed charges in Miami. When I confronted her, she said it was a last-minute venue change." "And you didn't buy it?" "I'm a financial analyst. I investigate discrepancies for a living." Jace pulled out a tablet and opened a spreadsheet. "Look at this." The data was similar to what Derek and I had discovered, but more comprehensive. Jace had been tracking his wife's activities with forensic precision. Bank records, travel patterns, communication logs, even social media activity. "She's been working with at least 3 other people," he explained. "Your wife is one of them. There's also someone named Evan Cross and another person they refer to as M in their encrypted messages." "Evan Cross," I repeated. "I've heard that name. He's Tessa's supervisor at Meridian." "That makes sense. He'd have access to higher-level distribution channels." Jace scrolled through more data. "The operation is sophisticated. They're using legitimate pharmaceutical shipments as cover for moving controlled substances. Opioids, stimulants, probably other things too." "How much money are we talking about total?" "Based on what I can trace, at least $10 million over the past 18 months. Probably more in cash transactions I can't track." I felt dizzy. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was part of a major criminal enterprise. The woman I'd been married to for 8 years was a drug trafficker. "What do we do with this information?" I asked. Jace's expression hardened. "We make them pay. Both of them. They've stolen from us, lied to us, and committed crimes that could send them to prison for decades. I want them to face consequences." "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning we gather enough evidence to destroy them completely. Their marriages, their careers, their freedom. Everything." I thought about Tessa's kiss at the airport, the practiced way she'd lied to my face, the forged signatures, the stolen property, the months of elaborate deception. She'd made a fool of me while building a criminal empire. "I'm in," I said. "What's the plan?" Jace smiled for the first time since we'd met. "First, we document everything, every transaction, every lie, every crime. Then we decide whether to go to the authorities or handle this ourselves. And our wives? They don't know we're on to them yet. Let's keep it that way. As far as they know, we're just the ignorant husbands sitting at home while they're off conquering the world. I pulled out my phone and checked the tracking app. Tessa was still at the Coral Gables house, probably planning her next move with Rhea and their criminal associates. They have no idea what's coming, I said. Good, Jace replied. Let's make sure we keep the element of surprise. The call from Rosie Chen came at 7:30 a.m. on day 3 of Tessa's supposed wine country adventure. Rosie was the private investigator Derek had recommended, former FBI, 20 years of experience, and a reputation for getting results that held up in court. We need to meet, she said without introduction. What I found about your wife's activities is bigger than adultery or even drug trafficking. This is national security level stuff. An hour later, I was sitting in Rosie's office in downtown Boston, staring at a wall covered with photographs, documents, and red string connecting various pieces of evidence. It looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. Your wife and her associates aren't just trafficking pharmaceuticals, Rosie began, pointing to a series of financial charts. They're part of a money laundering operation that connects to terrorist financing networks in Eastern Europe. My mouth went dry. Terrorists? The cryptocurrency transactions Derek identified? They're being routed through wallets associated with known criminal organizations in Ukraine and Romania, organizations that have connections to groups on the State Department's watch list. She handed me a thick folder. The FBI has been investigating this network for 8 months. They call it Operation Sunset, named after the shell companies your wife's group uses to hide their assets. I flipped through the documents, seeing Tessa's name highlighted in yellow on multiple pages. Bank records, surveillance photos, intercepted communications. The federal government had been watching my wife longer than I had. How deep is she in this? I asked. Deep enough to face life in prison if convicted. The money laundering charges alone carry a 20-year minimum. Add in the pharmaceutical trafficking and the terrorism connections, and she's looking at multiple life sentences. And they don't know the FBI is watching them? Rosie smiled grimly. They think they're smarter than they are. Classic criminal arrogance. But the Bureau has been building an airtight case. They're planning to make arrests within the next 2 weeks. My phone buzzed with another cheerful text from Tessa. Having the most amazing time. The wine here is incredible. Miss you so much. She's still maintaining the cover story, I said, showing Rosie the message. Of course she is. As far as she knows, you're the clueless husband who believes everything she tells you. That's actually been helpful for the investigation. How so? The FBI has been monitoring your home Wi-Fi network for months. Every time your wife accesses her criminal accounts from your house, they capture the data. Your ignorance has been their best surveillance tool. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation. Not only had my wife been lying to me for over a year, but the federal government had been using me as an unwitting accomplice in their investigation. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. Rosie pulled out another document. The FBI wants to offer you immunity in exchange for cooperation. They need someone with legitimate access to your wife's communications and financial records. What kind of cooperation? Nothing dangerous. Just maintain the status quo. Keep pretending you don't know what she's doing. Let her continue using your home network for her criminal activities. Maybe ask a few casual questions about her work trips. And in exchange? Full immunity from prosecution, protection from retaliation, and help recovering the assets she's stolen from you. The cabin in New Hampshire, the money she's moved to offshore accounts, everything. I thought about Jace Arnell and our plans for revenge. What about Rhea Morrick's husband? Is he getting the same offer? Rosie's expression darkened. Mr. Arnell is a problem. He's been conducting his own investigation, which is interfering with the federal case. The Bureau would prefer if he backed off and let them handle this professionally. And if he doesn't? Then he could find himself charged as an accessory after the fact. Interfering with a federal investigation is a serious crime. I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue working with Jace to expose our wives ourselves, risking federal charges and losing any chance of recovering my stolen assets. Or I could cooperate with the FBI and let them handle justice through the legal system. I need time to think about this, I said. You have 24 hours. After that, the Bureau moves forward with or without your cooperation. I left Rosie's office with my head spinning. Everything I thought I knew about the situation had changed. This wasn't just about adultery or even drug trafficking. My wife was connected to international terrorism financing. The stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. I called Derek and asked him to meet me at home. When I explained what Rosie had told me, his reaction was immediate and emphatic. "Take the deal," he said. "Whatever personal satisfaction you might get from exposing Tessa yourself isn't worth risking federal charges. Let the FBI handle this." "But what about Jace? We made an agreement." "Jace is going to have to make his own choice. You can't save him from his own mistakes." I spent the afternoon reviewing the immunity agreement Rosie had given me. The terms were straightforward. Cooperate with the federal investigation, maintain operational security, and provide access to any evidence I discovered. In exchange, I would be protected from prosecution and assisted in recovering stolen assets. The decision became easier when I checked Tessa's location and saw she was still at the Coral Gables house. According to her social media, she was supposed to be touring wineries in Napa Valley. The elaborate deception she was maintaining made it clear that her criminal activities were ongoing and serious. At 6 p.m., I called Jace to explain the situation. His reaction was not what I expected. "The FBI approached me too," he admitted. "3 days ago. I've been debating whether to tell you." "What did you decide?" "I'm not taking their deal. I want to handle this myself. Rhea destroyed our marriage and committed crimes that hurt innocent people. I don't want her getting a plea bargain from federal prosecutors." "Jace, they're talking about terrorism charges. This is way bigger than we thought." "Which is exactly why I can't let the government sweep it under the rug. These people need to face full consequences for what they've done." I understood his anger, but I also understood the reality of our situation. "If you interfere with the federal investigation, you could go to prison yourself." "Maybe, but at least I'll know I didn't let them get away with it." After the call ended, I sat in my office staring at the immunity agreement. Signing it meant abandoning any thoughts of personal revenge. It meant trusting the federal justice system to hold Tessa accountable for her crimes. But it also meant protecting myself and recovering the assets she'd stolen. It meant not risking my own freedom for the satisfaction of exposing her myself. I signed the document and emailed it to Rosie Chen. 20 minutes later, she called back. "Welcome to Operation Sunset, Mr. Farrow. Your first assignment is simple. Act normal. When your wife comes home, pretend everything is fine. Can you do that?" I looked at the tracking app on my phone. Tessa was still 200 miles away, living a lie that was about to collapse around her. "I can do that," I said. "Good, because in about 10 days her world is going to end. And when it does, you'll be protected." Day 4 of Tessa's wine country adventure started with a phone call that changed everything. I was making coffee when my lawyer, Patricia Hendricks, called with news that made my heart race. "The separation papers are ready," she said. "My process server can deliver them today if you want to move forward." I'd contacted Patricia 3 days earlier after discovering the extent of Tessa's criminal activities. The FBI immunity deal protected me legally, but I still needed to protect myself financially and personally. Filing for separation would freeze our joint assets and create a legal record of when I discovered her deception. "Do it," I said. "Serve them at the Coral Gables address." "Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back." I thought about the forged signatures, the stolen cabin, the months of lies. "I'm sure." At 2:30 p.m., my phone rang. Tessa's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. The trap was about to spring. Hello, honey, I answered, injecting false warmth into my voice. Wes, what the hell is going on? Her voice was shaky, panicked. Some man came by the house saying he's your lawyer. He had papers. What's happening? What house? I asked innocently. I thought you were in Napa Valley. There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear voices. A woman arguing with someone, a man telling people to calm down. The Coral Gables house was in chaos. There was a change of plans. We came to Miami instead, but that's not important. Why is your lawyer looking for me? Relax, I said, using the exact words I'd rehearsed. It's just the separation. Separation? What separation? Wes, what are you talking about? The one I filed 3 days ago, after I found out about the cabin you sold without telling me, and the offshore accounts, and the cryptocurrency transactions. Should I continue? The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Tessa spoke again, her voice was completely different. Cold, calculating, dangerous. You have no idea what you're doing, she said. You need to call your lawyer right now and withdraw those papers. Or what? Or you're going to regret this for the rest of your life. The line went quiet. I looked at my phone and saw she'd hung up. Derek arrived 20 minutes later, grinning like he'd won the lottery. How did she take it? About as well as you'd expect. She went from panic to threats in about 60 seconds. Good. That means she knows she's cornered. He pulled out his laptop. Rosie called me an hour ago. The FBI moved up their timeline. They're making arrests tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? I thought we had another week. Apparently your process server spooked them. There's an FBI surveillance team watching the Coral Gables house, and they saw a lot of activity after the papers were delivered. People leaving in a hurry, phones being destroyed, that kind of thing. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. Everything was accelerating faster than I'd expected. What happens to me during the arrests? You'll be contacted by federal agents as a witness. They'll want a formal statement about what you discovered and when, but you're protected under the immunity agreement. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. We need to talk. I'm coming home tonight. I showed the message to Derek. She's running scared. Let her come. The house is probably already under surveillance. If she shows up here, the FBI will have her. But I knew Tessa better than that. She was too smart to walk into an obvious trap. If she was coming home, she had a plan. At 11:30 p.m., I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw a black sedan with tinted windows. Not Tessa's usual rental car. This was something more expensive, more anonymous. The front door opened, and my wife walked in like she owned the place, which, technically, she still did until the separation was finalized. Hello, Wes. She looked different, harder, more focused. The mask of suburban housewife had been completely discarded. How was Napa? I asked. Cut the act. We both know where I was and why. She sat down across from me, studying my face. The question is what you think you're going to accomplish with this separation nonsense. I think I'm going to protect myself from a federal criminal investigation. Her expression didn't change. What federal investigation? The one that's been watching you for 8 months. Operation Sunset. Does that ring a bell? For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, but it lasted only a second before the cold calculation returned. You're bluffing, she said. If there was a federal investigation, I'd know about it. Would you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been played. All those secure communications you thought were private? The FBI has been reading them? All those cryptocurrency transactions you thought were untraceable? They've been tracking every one. Tessa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. How long have you known? About the affair? Months? About the criminal enterprise? About a week. And you decided to destroy our marriage instead of talking to me about it. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Our marriage was destroyed the moment you forged my signature and stole our cabin. Everything since then has just been paperwork. She turned back to face me. You have no idea how much money is involved here, Wes. Enough to set us up for life. We could disappear, start over somewhere else. With stolen money from drug trafficking and terrorism financing? No thanks. Terrorism? She looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? The cryptocurrency wallets you've been using are connected to organizations on the State Department's watch list. Congratulations, honey. You're not just a drug dealer. You're a national security threat. The fear returned to her eyes, stronger this time. That's impossible. Evan said the crypto networks were clean. Evan Cross? Your supervisor and co-conspirator? He lied to you, just like you lied to me. Tessa sat down heavily, the weight of the situation finally hitting her. What do you want? I want you to leave, tonight. Don't come back, don't contact me, don't try to access any of our joint accounts. The separation papers freeze everything until the courts sort it out. And if I don't? Then you'll be here when the FBI comes to arrest you. Probably sometime tomorrow morning. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the woman I'd married 8 years earlier. Scared, vulnerable, human. But that woman had made choices that led us to this moment. I never meant for it to go this far, she said quietly. But it did, and now we both have to live with the consequences. Tessa stood up and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. You could have just asked for a divorce, she said. You wouldn't have let me go, I replied. She didn't argue with that assessment. The door closed behind her, and I heard the sedan start up and drive away. I sat in my living room for another hour, processing what had just happened. My marriage was over. My wife was a federal fugitive. Everything I'd built over the past 8 years was gone. But for the first time in months, I felt free. The FBI arrived at 6:15 a.m., exactly 12 hours after Tessa left. I was already awake, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window when the black SUVs pulled up outside. Agent Sarah Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of focused intensity that comes from years of federal law enforcement. She introduced herself and her partner, Agent Thompson, while showing me their credentials. Mr. Farrow, we understand you've been cooperating with our investigation through Ms. Chen. We need to conduct a formal interview about your wife's activities. Of course. Should I call my lawyer? That's your right. But given your immunity agreement, it's not necessary unless you prefer to have representation present. I decided to proceed without Patricia. The immunity deal protected me, and I had nothing to hide. We sat in my living room while Agent Martinez asked detailed questions about Tessa's travel patterns, financial activities, and behavioral changes over the past year. I answered everything honestly, providing dates, amounts, and specific incidents that had raised my suspicions. When did you first become aware of the cryptocurrency transactions? Agent Thompson asked. About a week ago. My brother Derek helped me analyze her banking records. We found transfers totaling nearly $900,000 over the past 6 months. And you had no prior knowledge of these transactions? None. I didn't even know she had accounts I couldn't access. Agent Martinez made notes on a tablet. Tell us about last night. Your wife came to the house after being served with separation papers. What did you discuss? I recounted the conversation in detail, including Tessa's offer to run away together and her apparent surprise about the terrorism connections. She seemed genuinely shocked when I mentioned the watch list organizations, I said, like she didn't know her cryptocurrency wallets were connected to those groups. That's consistent with what we've observed, Agent Martinez said. Most of the lower-level participants don't understand the full scope of the operation. Lower level? I thought Tessa was running the distribution network. She was running part of it, but there are at least 3 other cells operating in different regions. Your wife's group handled the Northeast Corridor. There are similar operations in California, Texas, and Florida. The scope was staggering. I'd thought Tessa was involved in a relatively small criminal enterprise. Instead, she'd been part of a national network that connected to international terrorism financing. What happens now? I asked. We execute arrest warrants for the primary targets: your wife, Rhea Morick, Evan Cross, and several others. The challenge is that some of them have already fled. Tessa left last night. I don't know where she went. We're tracking her. She used a credit card this morning at a gas station in Connecticut. She's heading north, probably toward the Canadian border. Agent Thompson leaned forward. Mr. Farrow, it's important that you understand your wife is now a federal fugitive. If she contacts you, you need to notify us immediately. Any assistance you provide her, even emotional support, could be construed as aiding and abetting. I understand, but I don't think she'll contact me. Our marriage is over. Don't be so sure. Fugitives often reach out to family members when they're desperate. She might try to convince you to help her, or she might threaten you to keep quiet. After the agents left, I called Derek to update him on the situation. He was at his office, monitoring news reports about the federal raids. It's all over the internet, he said. Meridian Corp's offices are being searched by federal agents. Evan Cross was arrested at his apartment this morning. The stock price has dropped 60%. What about Rhea Morick? Still at large, like Tessa. But they'll find her. The FBI doesn't usually lose people once they're actively hunting them. I spent the rest of the morning fielding phone calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. Word had leaked that I was the husband of one of the fugitives, and they wanted statements about my wife's criminal activities. No comment became my standard response. At noon, Jace Arnell called. He sounded exhausted and defeated. They arrested me this morning, he said. Obstruction of justice and interfering with a federal investigation. I'm out on bail, but my lawyer says I'm looking at serious prison time. I'm sorry, Jace. I tried to warn you. I know. I should have listened. There was a long pause. The FBI agent who arrested me said Rhea is with your wife. They're traveling together, probably sharing resources. Where are they heading? Nobody knows for sure, but Agent Martinez thinks they're trying to reach one of the cryptocurrency wallets they can access from outside the country. If they can get to Europe or South America, they might be able to disappear permanently. The thought of Tessa escaping justice bothered me more than I'd expected. After everything she'd done, the lies, the theft, the criminal activities, the idea that she might get away with it felt wrong. What are the chances they'll be caught? Better than 50-50, according to my lawyer. The FBI has frozen most of their financial resources, and they're coordinating with international law enforcement. But if they reach a non-extradition country with access to cryptocurrency, they could stay hidden for years. That afternoon, I drove to Patricia Hendricks's law office to discuss the separation proceedings. With Tessa now a federal fugitive, the legal situation had become more complicated. The good news is that her criminal activities strengthen your case for asset protection, Patricia explained. The court will likely award you full ownership of any legitimate assets, including the house and your business. What about the money she stole? The cabin sale, the cryptocurrency transfers? The FBI asset forfeiture team will handle that. If they recover funds from the criminal enterprise, you'll be entitled to restitution for your losses. And if they don't recover the money? Then you'll have to write it off as a loss. But given your cooperation with the investigation, the federal government will probably help you recover at least some of what was stolen. I left the law office feeling cautiously optimistic. The immediate crisis was over. Tessa was gone, the FBI had their evidence, and I was protected from prosecution. Now, I just had to rebuild my life without her. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really over. Tessa was smart, resourceful, and desperate. People like that don't just disappear quietly. They make one last play. 6 months later, I was sitting in my home office when the call came from Agent Martinez. It was a Tuesday morning in March, unseasonably warm for Boston, and I'd been working on a new client project when my phone rang. Mr. Farrow, I wanted to update you on your wife's case. We found her. I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair. Where? Costa Rica. She and Ria Morik were arrested 3 days ago trying to board a flight to Romania. They'd been hiding in a small town outside San Jose for the past 4 months. How did you find them? Cryptocurrency transaction. They tried to access one of their wallets to fund the flight to Europe. The moment they logged in, we had their location. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice would finally be served, sadness that it had come to this at all. What happens now? Extradition proceedings. They'll fight it, but Costa Rica has a treaty with the United States. They'll be back here within 60 days. And then? Trial. Based on the evidence we've gathered, your wife is looking at 25 to life. The terrorism financing charges alone carry mandatory minimums. After Agent Martinez hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the past year, the investigation, the arrests, the media attention, the slow process of rebuilding my life. It had been the hardest year of my adult life, but also strangely liberating. I'd sold the house in Brookline and moved to a smaller place in Cambridge. My consulting business had actually grown during the chaos. Apparently, surviving a federal investigation gave me credibility in certain circles. I'd started dating again, cautiously, but with more self-awareness than I'd had in years. Derek knocked on my office door and walked in carrying 2 beers. Saw the news alert, he said, handing me a bottle. How do you feel? Tired, I said honestly, but also finished, like I can finally move on completely. Any regrets? I thought about that question seriously. Did I regret marrying Tessa? Did I regret not seeing the signs earlier? Did I regret cooperating with the FBI instead of trying to handle things myself? No, I said finally. I made the best decisions I could with the information I had. Everything else was out of my control. Derek nodded and raised his beer. To moving forward. To moving forward. We drank in comfortable silence. 2 brothers who'd survived a crisis together and come out stronger on the other side. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from the federal prosecutor's office. Tessa had agreed to plead guilty to avoid a trial. In exchange for her cooperation in prosecuting the other members of the criminal network, she would serve 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 10 years. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. 15 years felt like justice, but it also felt like the end of a chapter I was ready to close. That evening, I had dinner with a woman named Lisa, a graphic designer I'd met through a client. She knew about my situation. It was impossible to date in Boston without people knowing about the FBI investigation, but she didn't seem bothered by it. Do you think you'll ever trust someone completely again? She asked over dessert. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try. Tessa's choices don't have to define my future relationships. That's a healthy attitude. It took me a while to get there. For months, I was angry at myself for not seeing the signs. But my therapist helped me understand that Tessa was deliberately deceiving me. I wasn't stupid or naive. I was married to someone who was very good at lying. Lisa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You survived something that would have destroyed a lot of people. That says something about your character. I looked at this woman who was slowly becoming important to me, and I realized that Tessa had given me one unexpected gift. By destroying our marriage so completely, she'd forced me to rebuild myself from scratch. The person I'd become was stronger, more self-aware, and more honest than the person I'd been before. Thank you, I said. For what? For giving me a chance to start over. 6 months after that, I received one final piece of correspondence related to the case. It was a check from the FBI Asset Forfeiture Division for $340,000, my share of the recovered funds from the criminal enterprise. Along with the check was a letter explaining that additional funds might be recovered as the investigation continued. I deposited the check and used part of it to buy a small cabin in Vermont. Not a replacement for the one Tessa had sold, but something new, something that was entirely mine. A place where I could go to think, to write, to be alone with my thoughts without any connection to my previous life. The first weekend I spent there, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the investigation, the arrests, the rebuilding. It had been 2 years since Tessa kissed me goodbye at the airport and flew to Miami instead of San Francisco. 2 years since my life fell apart and I had to put it back together piece by piece. I pulled out my phone and looked at the Find My app, which I still had installed but never used anymore. The temptation to track and monitor had been replaced by a healthier approach to relationships, communication, trust, and the willingness to walk away if those things weren't reciprocated. I deleted the app and finished my coffee. The past was finished, the future was waiting, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to finding out what came next.